Brian Rouff. I will be your congenial host today for the next hour. I'd like to thank everybody for coming out on this beautiful Saturday, and also like to thank Henderson Libraries for hosting this event and bringing the writing community and the reading community together. Kind of works out quite nicely when that happens. We've got 4 of the area's finest authors represented on the panel today. And I'm going to do a brief intro of each one because I'm sure they have a lot to say. I expect a very lively discussion. So immediately to my left is Deborah Coonts, and they spelled your name wrong.
They did, yeah.
Mine too. Don't feel so bad. But we all have microphones, and that's an unusual thing, so that's excellent. Deborah is a novelist, best known for her Lucky O'Toole Vegas Adventure series. And by the way, all of our writers today have been selling their books and will continue to sell your books after this program. So next to Deb Coonts is Gerard de Marigny, known as G. So we can all remember that. And G is the author of the best-selling Chris De Niro series and the Archangel series. So we'll find out from him how he juggles 2 series at once. Next to him is an old friend of mine, Matt O'Brien. I knew you when you were Matt. Now he's Matthew. And he's a journalist, longtime journalist here in Las Vegas, and author of many books, including probably best known for Beneath the Neon, which takes place under the city, and also My Week at the Blue Angel, which in a lot of ways is scarier than Beneath the Neon. And then, last but not least, we've got Dr. David G. Schwartz. So we have actually credibility on the panel today. Dr. Schwartz is director of UNLV Center for Gaming Research and author of many books, many of them quite historical, including Suburban Xanadu, the Casino Resort on the Las Vegas Strip and Beyond, and Roll the Bones, the History of Gambling. And he holds the kind of the award on the panel for the longest titles. So, where they go. So, with that being said, and by the way, we'll leave 10 or 15 minutes at the end for Q&A. My first goal here was to figure out what all these authors have in common, and the only thing I could figure out is they're all local and they're all writers. So, let's start with that. Deb, why don't we start with you? How does being local play into your writing? And how long have you been here, by the way?
I have been here 13 years. I try and say 14 since 13 really isn't a lucky number, but listen, Vegas really is a character in my stories, and that's how my fiction series, that was sort of the genesis of the Lucky books, and that I wanted to write a book about Vegas. I wanted to write a series about what I really like about Vegas. And I don't see the side of Vegas that Matt does. I see the fun and the silliness and all of that. And so I've kept it light and lively and just tried to showcase our city. And it's very important. And it's really funny, when I do book events in Las Vegas, one of the first questions that people ask me is, do you live here? And so I think there's sort of this perception, and I believe that it's actually true, that if you don't live here, you don't get Vegas quite right. So Vegas is very important to me.
And G, you are our other novelist, and how does Vegas come into play in your work?
Well, we moved here about 12 years, 11 years ago, and I wrote a book, and then I put our
use the microphone.
he's trying to. How about now? Are we okay? The lead character in the novel moves here. So I made him based here I actually made him based in Henderson, but everybody outside of Las Vegas goes Henderson. So they just consider it a Las Vegas-based character.
And Matt, as a journalist, and so you're writing primarily nonfiction, although I think you are delving into fiction as well lately, is that correct?
Yeah. Well, I moved out here from Atlanta, Georgia in late 1997 after college, just wanting to do some writing out here.
went into sports bet, see the West and Southwest. I had never visited Vegas in my life. I just moved out here. Thought I would stay a year or two. I've ended up staying 16, almost 17 years, which I thought was a really unique story about ended up in Vegas, and I come to find out that's how 90% of the people end up moving here, it seems like. But for me, Vegas is more than a backdrop in my writing. It's more typically like a main character in the stories.
And we'll talk a lot more about that with everybody. And David, you as well, would you primarily consider yourself a historian, or is it tough to pigeonhole you?
Well, hopefully it's tough to pigeonhole me, but I've really shifted. When I first moved out of here, which is 13 years ago now, I was mostly historian. Since then, I've done a lot more contemporary writing, especially for Vegas 7 magazine, and got a feel for that sort of thing. And I think I've shifted. So not so much history, more telling the stories that are happening right now. I think these are some of the most interesting stories that have ever happened in Vegas.
So let's stick with that for a little while, and then we'll move our way back. See, there's method to this madness. So the shift that you made, what prompted that? And was it based on true life experiences, something living here that kind of triggered something?
Well, I think it's a couple of things. First of all, it's seeing what are the stories that people want to hear. And doing an exhaustively detailed, researched historical book it's very rewarding. You satisfy your intellectual curiosity, but it doesn't really fly off the shelves. So for me, it was a shift to saying, well, hey, I want to write the kind of book that people not only want to read, but they can't put down. So that's what I've tried to do with Grandissimo, which is my latest book. So shifting to more of that. So I think it's really about that. And then also just being in town for longer and understanding it, making it more three-dimensional. I think factors into.
Now, is Grandissimo, is that the Jay Sarno book?
Yeah, that's Jay Sarno.
Tell us a little bit about how you go about researching a book like that, and is everybody, tell them a little bit about Sarno.
So Jay was, I'm convinced, the most interesting guy in the history of Vegas. Comes to Vegas with Teamster money, builds Caesar's Palace and Circus, ends up losing both casinos, pays the biggest bribe in IRS history and gets off because Oscar Goodman is his lawyer, and Oscar was a very good lawyer, and was also a problem gambler. And you would think a guy who built these 2 casinos and was so formative an influence would be really well known, but he's not. And I think a lot of that's because we're kind of uneasy with that whole impulse problem gambling thing in here Vegas still, and we don't, it's no problem to take a guy like Bugsy Siegel, who was a murderer and by all accounts a pretty bad guy, and make him into a hero, but to take a guy who was a problem gambler, well, we don't want to celebrate him. So to me, that's the most fascinating thing about him.
And then, how long has he been not with us? Because did you have an opportunity to talk to him?
Well, he 30 years. He's been dead for 30 years, so I didn't have a chance to talk to him. But I did get to interview a ton of his business associates, a lot of his family, and probably the most interesting interview I did was with Evel Knievel a couple weeks before he passed away, which was kind of a white-knuckle experience, if you could describe talking to a guy in an oxygen tent 2,500 miles away from you as a white-knuckle experience. I mean, just a real forceful personality there. So,
and probably knowing Evel, he was smoking at the time.
He might have been, yeah. I mean, really, but real huge presence, even over the phone.
Now, Matt, as I say, you and I are friends, and so one of the things, I don't know if I've ever told you this, but I'll admit it here now, that I admire about you is your ability to put yourself into dangerous situations in pursuit of a story. And so at least I think they're dangerous. When you decided to go down into the storm drains and investigate the homeless community who lives down there, what were your thoughts at the time? I mean, did you prepare in a certain way to avoid bodily harm?
Well, I got the idea in the spring of 2002. I had heard about a murderer who would use the underground flood channels to evade the police. And I had noticed these channels before, but had never thought about going down in them. But I was like, wow, I wonder what this guy experienced down there, what he heard, what he saw, what he smelled. So that compelled me to kind of follow his trail with another writer for City Life. We were horrified, because we had seen some pretty crazy stuff in broad daylight above ground in Vegas, and we had no idea what may be going on down in these tunnels. So we were wearing like hard hats and trench coats, and he had a big knife and I had a golf club, and we just started roaming these tunnels I mean, it turns out in retrospect it was a bit of overkill, but it was part of the adventure. And the big discovery we made was that people were living in the underground flood channels right beneath the neon, as my book title suggests.
And that goes on till this day, correct?
Yeah. I mean, I've tried to work with community organizations, nonprofits to help the people down there, but there are still hundreds of people living down there now, unfortunately.
Keeping an eye on the weather, among other things.
Yeah, we went for 3-4 months without rain, which can happen here in Las Vegas. But the people down there get comfortable. You know, they almost forget that they're living in a flood channel. Then they're reminded, you know, when we get a heavy rain like we got a week ago, or the flash floods that come in the summer. That's why anytime there's flooding here, you'll read about a swiftwater rescue or someone drowning, and it's a lot of times it's someone who was living down in the flood channels and was asleep or drunk or passed out.
Mm-hmm. And then your other book, I'm only halfway kidding when I say that staying a week at the Blue Angel, are you familiar with where that is? And I know you are. You know, is in a lot of ways more frightening than going down into the channels. What was perhaps the scariest part of staying at that motel? And maybe tell everybody where that is too.
Yeah, I've always been fascinated with these old motels that were in the 50s and 60s, really popular tourist destinations. I've always been curious, you know, what were their histories, when did they open, who did they used to cater to, and who do they cater to now, mostly transients, people coming and going from the city, and what are their hopes and dreams. So I checked into what I thought was the seediest and most poetic weekly motel in Vegas, the Blue Angel. That's on East Fremont near Eastern and Boulder Highway. It actually closed about a year ago, so I'm glad I got there when I did. And I checked in for a week. You know, it's cash only. You give them $100 under the plexiglass, you know, window. The pool has been filled with gravel because they're not, you know, catering to tourists anymore, and it would be an insurance liability. So. But much like the tunnels, you go in kind of frightened, expecting the worst, and you find, this is one of the themes of my books, is beauty in unexpected places. You meet smart, interesting people. There's incredible artwork beneath the city. There's the signage of the Blue Angel Motel, designed by Betty Willis. So you go in horrified, and then a lot of times you realize it wasn't really necessary.
Gee, living here for now, you said what, 11, 12 years, depending on who we talk to. When you're writing, how much organically goes into your writing, and how much research do you have to do? Do you try to make your novels extremely accurate within the context of the town?
Yeah, is this thing working again? Okay. My books are geopolitical, so they're all around the world. The main character is based here. Some of the story will take place here. I think the novels that I like to read are the ones that I write. I mean, I write the kind of books that I would like to read, which is make everything absolutely as accurate as possible, and then drop my characters in so that you can't tell. I remember one of the books that fooled me was Hunt for Red October. I remember reading that book and then starting to look up, you know, before the internet, you know, but actually starting to do research and saying, is there a Red October out there? You know, somewhere in, you know, wherever it was, upstate, you know, up in the New England area. I was like, well, that's a really good book. It fooled me. And I said, the way you fool people is by making everything else accurate. And then you drop your characters in and you make them play within the scene the way it would be. So yeah, I have to do a lot of research, and I learn about a lot of places because I follow current events. So the latest books is in North and South Korea and in Yemen. You know, I knew nothing about it going into the book. And you know, I don't read a lot of research before I do the book. But as the story unfolds, I find out more and more about where I'm writing. So that's how I do it.
And what's the difference between your two series?
Well, Chris De Niro's series is the main series, and it's about Chris De Niro. It's about a hedge fund manager, a guy that worked his way up and became a top hedge fund manager, and he loses his wife in the trade center, and he devotes his life and his money to not letting that happen again. So he opens up a counterterrorism firm. The Archangel series is a spin-off that was the paramilitary group that are attached to a lot of these counterterrorism agencies. I don't think a lot of people realize that the government doesn't do all of our policing and security. So they hire out, they vend out to third-party firms. And so I based it off of a real firm in Arlington. So the Archangel just allowed me to do it. It's a novella series, so it's shorter work, written a little differently, and it allows me to also put something out in between the big novels that take 4 months to write.
And Deb, how many books into your series are you at this point?
I've finished the 5th one.
Congratulations. And are you running out of steam, or do you have more ideas?
No, actually I've seen it as a finite series, though. I think writers and readers get series burnout, so I always saw it as a 7-book series. So.
And would you describe a little bit about your main character?
My main character is a young woman in her early 30s. Her name is Lucky, and she works at a big strip property that's fictional called Babylon. And she is the head of customer relations, and there is no such job at a big strip property. It's usually guest relations, and then there's somebody in marketing. And so her job is about an amalgam of about 5 different jobs that really occur at a big property. And I just did that because, number one, it would be way too boring to put in all of the facts about how an organization like MGM or whatever runs on a day-to-day basis and how many thousands of people there are involved to make it happen. And I also just wanted Lucky to be able to get her hands into a whole lot of different arenas. And so she interfaces with security, she handles the entertainers, she handles some of the staff, she certainly handles all the guests that get into trouble and create some mischief. And I wanted to use her as sort of the lightning rod to show how Vegas can be fun and silly, and why 45 million people a year come here for a little bit of entertainment, a little bit of mischief, nothing life-altering. They don't go home with a dread disease, and they actually take some money home with them. And so that's Lucky.
And your books are a lot of fun. Do you go out to the strip and take notes, or what is your process?
Usually I think about a big event in Vegas, a fight weekend, or when the UFO people come to town, or the Adult Video Awards and the Wife Swappers. That's the first book. And so, with that book, I have no idea. I mean, people were always going, so what's your research like? And I'm like, why do you want to go? But I did go to the Adult Video Awards, which I thought was an absolute hoot. But I'm still a little shocked, but it was okay. Birth by Fire in Vegas. But I try and figure a big event that's sort of a Vegas kind of event, and I do research on those events. I went to the Final Table, World Series of Poker Final Table, and I wasn't at all interested in poker. I think watching people play poker is about as much fun as watching grass grow. But I was fascinated with the people that came to interact with the poker players, and just sort of the whole scene that takes place around that sort of venue. And so I used that in my last novel, So Damn Lucky. But I do research on those things, and then I do research on how a hotel really is run here in town, and what is it believable for Lucky to do, and how would she handle certain situations that come up with guests, and do they really have a holding tank down in the basement for the guys and gals that are too drunk, and how does security work? What does it look like? And there's actually, in the big hotels, there's 2 separate branches of security, and I combined them into one because I didn't want to deal with all of that in a novel. It would get way too complex. And so, since my books are works of fiction, I need the air of authenticity. I need for people in Vegas to read it and go, oh yeah, that's exactly how it works. But it doesn't have to be precisely how it works, and there may be more people involved in the actual process than in the fictional one, and that's just part of my genre.
Thank you. I have a question for the audience. Besides being readers, do we have people here who are writers? Just show of hands. Quite a few. Okay. I think readers and writers both are interested in the process. You know, to me, writing is a habit, but different authors write different ways. There's an interesting thing on somewhere on the web recently about famous authors through history and what time they got up in the morning or in the afternoon or late at night and what time they started writing. And also how much they drank and all that other stuff. But,
We all know about that.
We do. You know, fuels the creative process. But if we could talk about your process, and maybe we'll start down there again and kind of work our way up.
Sure, yeah. I mean, that's changed a lot. So, like, it's okay.
Gee, I'm shocked. Everything changed when you got married.
When I got married,
Who would have predicted that?
yeah, so now it's pretty much usually getting up about 3 in the morning and kind of making the most of that 3 hours or so before everybody else gets up and trying to get stuff down on paper. And what I try to do is I do a ton of research and just immerse myself in it until it just comes to me. And it gets to the point where you've got so much stuff in your head, you just have to get it out on paper. And that's how I do it. So it's really getting that, immersing myself, getting that inspiration, and then getting the time and making the most of that time.
And of course, you've got a day job that takes up a lot of your time.
Yes, I've got a day job too at UNLV, so it's really a labor of love.
And then probably your wife and family want to see you from time to time.
Yeah. So yeah, I have to do it when no one else is awake for the most part. So, what do you mean? I do use a computer. Yeah, it's so I use my computer and just kind of get it out there.
And Matt, how about you?
Well, I have writer friends who think it's important to be spontaneous whenever they inspired, they get to their desk at that point in work. I'm not like that. I think it's important for me as a writer to have a regular routine, you know, clock in, clock out type thing. I do the same thing at night, read, watch a movie, go to bed at a decent hour, then sleep 8 hours, get up, eat breakfast, stretch out, and write. Take, you know, a short lunch break and then try to write a few more hours. So I try to be really regimented with it, and that's what's worked for me.
And are you back in school now too, or is
Yeah, actually, after many years in journalism, I went back to grad school. I'm at UNLV doing an MFA in creative writing. Most of my background is in journalism, but I want to take some of those real life experiences and fictionalize them. So I'm working on trying to do more creative writing, more kind of more popular novels that could be adapted into screenplays.
Mm-hmm. And so since we have two primarily fiction writers and two primarily nonfiction on the panel, and you have a foot in both camps at the moment, what is the primary difference and the primary challenge between the two?
Yes, since my journalism, I try to make it narrative and literary. In my fiction, I try to make very realistic. I thought it was going to be a very kind of easy transition to make. It's been a bit of a rude awakening for me in these fiction workshops at UNLV, getting feedback and needing more narrative in there, you know. So it's been a challenge actually to go back and forth between the two.
And you're kind of trying to find some middle ground, it sounds like? Where the
well,
two
I don't know if
intersect?
there is. They seem to me right now to be very separate genres in a lot of ways. I mean, a lot of stuff carries over, the language and character development and stuff like that, but it seems like two different processes.
Interesting. And G, you have an interesting background. You were a rock and roll guy for many years, right? And how does that come into play with your writing? And is there anything about being a professional musician, not magician, but musician, that also transfers maybe to the writing life?
Well, a component of being a rock musician was writing. I was a writer, so I wrote my music. I wrote for TV, and I wrote music for TV. I'm kind of from the same camp as Matt. I think that if you're going to be a professional writer, you gotta do it every day. My father used to have a sign. He was a salesman, and it said, "Selling is like shaving. If you don't do it every day, you're a bum." So, yeah, I mean, I have to. There's other things that you do. I'm actually very impressed that, you know, Matt. I want to be that. You know, where he's writing in the daytime, he's writing at the nighttime. That's a great thing. That's a great thing for me to aspire to.
I should clarify, that's like in the ideal situation. In a perfect world. When you're in grad school, it's a very imperfect world, so I'm not quite able to stick to that routine.
I'm glad he straightened that out, because I'm manic depressive, and I just went into an episode. And we wrote that much.
Are you feeling better about yourself now? Okay, good.
Myself right now. So yeah, I would say the musician thing is, when you're in a rock band, you do a lot of traveling. Actually, honestly, if there's any rock musicians out there, you all know we're all lazy. So I never really ascribe to not doing everything in the daytime because we work at night. You know, you do shows at night. I wake up early, I get to work, and there's a lot of things to do. The marketing, because I don't know if the rest of us are self-publishers. If you're an indie publisher, you're running a publishing company, so you have your backlist, you have people to talk to, you have your blog on your social media and all that stuff. That all's got to be taken care of, and then the writing comes for me later in the day. So I write. I probably don't start going to paper, which my family, my sons are here. I drive everybody crazy because I'm neurotic until I'm actually writing. It's kind of, you know, so I'm waiting a lot of hours in the day before I'm actually putting words on paper. And by the way, I am writing something that's non-fiction now, so there is a big difference, because on the non-fiction, I'm writing a memoir for another rock musician guy that was in my band. He's now Ted Nugent's bass player, played for a lot of different people. So I'm writing a memoir, and that's non-fiction. That's more of transcribing. So I'm doing Skype interviews with him once a week, and then I have to, you know, dramatize. I have to turn it into a story. That's a whole different. Like, that's true. It's a whole different style of writing. I'm not creating his life. I have to stop myself from creating his life. You know, like I could really make him do some interesting stuff, but I gotta really stick to his story. So.
And Deb, what's your background?
I have a fascinating background. Actually, I didn't have any trouble transitioning to being a fiction writer, which I call being a professional liar, because I used to be a lawyer. So it worked out really well. You know, there was none of this truth versus fiction thing. You know, it's fine. So anyway, I guess writing for me is a job, and it used to be just a pleasure when I was a lawyer and a mom and a golf mom. My son played junior golf all over creation, and which was a real grind, but it was a lot of fun. And there wasn't a lot of time for my avocation of writing, but once I sold a novel, and it became more than just about me playing with words. I had to treat it as more, and so it's a job for me. Actually, it's just part of my job. The overarching job of what I do is I'm a shameless self-promoter. That's what writers have to do. And these days, I was laughing because he said, if you're an indie pub guy, you know, you've got to do all this marketing, and you're running a publishing company, and you're doing all this stuff. I thought, well, as a traditional published novelist, I still do all of that stuff. I just send the money to the publisher. And so I'm not sure it's much better at all. But so it's tough these days with book selling, and I too would like to give a shout out to the library anyway. Libraries are wonderful, and I hope you all find wonderful books in this library. And I come every quarter and do a chat, and hopefully these authors will come and be my guests, because I like to highlight other authors to everybody. So look for that too.
You make a good point, because this is art and commerce combined. And, you know, it's not like the old days where you hooked up with a traditional publisher and they assigned you a publicist and they had a whole bunch of marketing dollars to help you promote your book. I don't care if you're indie or you're with Simon & Schuster, I'd say 90% plus of the promotion falls on the shoulders of the author these days. And so, now, you're with which publisher? Macmillan. And you're indie. And you've sold a boatload of ebooks, so we may talk about e versus hard copy in a few minutes. And Matt, you've been with a number of different publishers, correct?
Well, the 2 books I wrote on my own were Huntington Press, and I've contributed to other books from, University of Nevada Press or Stevens Press, publishers.
And David?
First book was with Routledge. Second one was with University of Nevada. Third one was with Gotham. And since then, I've moved and done them on my own, to my own imprint, Winchester Books. And I'll tell you, it's a much better experience as a writer. And I think really it's kind of a revolution that's going on. When I did Roll the Bones, it's a huge, almost 600-page book, wrote it up in Word, sent it off to them. They gave it back to me and said, well, here's what it's going to look like. And I said, well, maybe I don't like this, maybe I don't like that. And they said pretty much tough luck. So it felt kind of disconnected from the experience. When you're doing it yourself, as I got to do with the new edition of Roll the Bones I've done in Grandissimo, you aren't just some kind of big floating brain spewing out words. You become almost a craftsman, an artisan, and you're really creating the whole product. So it's kind of neat to go from just writing it and entrusting other people to take it to saying, well, no, I'm the guy who decides what the typeface is going to be, how big the pictures are going to be, how it looks like. And it's a real feeling of pride to hold that finished thing in your hands and know that, yeah, I'm the one who is responsible for all this. Although, of course, you do have to hire people to do the stuff that you can't do. So like art, hired somebody good for that, indexing, proofreading, stuff like that. But still, it's great to have that creative control over the whole process.
No doubt. And we're all, no matter what the creative endeavor is, we're all on the cutting edge of a real market revolution in terms of everybody from new authors to people that have been writing professionally, name brand authors for 30, 40 years who are now buying back their product and or starting their own indie presses. And it's the same thing in music, it's the same thing in the art world. I mean, the traditional gatekeepers seem to be falling by the wayside, kicking and screaming for the most part. And the indie, I think, is the wave of the future. But let's get more into promotion. I'm fascinated by that. And again, let's stay with you and work our way back. Since most of the promotion does fall, well, now all of it on you.
Yeah.
And we only have so much time in the day. Mm-hmm. What has worked best for you?
Well, first of all, it's a ton of work. It's a lot harder to promote a book, I think, than it is to write a book. I'd say writing is the easiest part, then it's doing the layout and getting everything to look good, and then promoting is the hardest thing. And pretty much it's just talking to people about the book, making myself available, doing events like this, and getting out there, and finding people who want to talk about the book. I've done a lot of book clubs, so that's getting together maybe 6 or 8 people and going in and talking about my book with them, and that's also a really great experience. The chance to not just meet somebody to signing or something like that, but spend an hour with a couple of people who have read your book and have questions about it. It's just a wonderful experience. And you learn a lot more about what people like and what turns people on when they read what you write. So that's also a great experience.
And there's nothing better, right?
Yeah.
And Matt, how about you?
Well, yeah, I mean, it takes a lot of work. I mean, obviously you focus on the writing, you create what you hope is a good product, but even if you're with the big publisher, a lot of times you have to promote it yourself. And as Dave was saying, it is as much or more work than actually writing the book.
Yeah, it's mostly grassroots, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, it is. You have to find your niche, whether it's an email list or, if it's Twitter, Facebook, word of mouth, newspapers. You have to experiment with all that stuff and then see what works best for you.
I've always thought it was very similar to running for office, except there's never an election. You just write more books and it just keeps going forever with any luck.
Yeah, and I've learned a lot from people like you. I mean, you're a master at balancing the PR stuff with the writing. Writers like Kathy Scott is very good about that. And yeah, so a lot of times you have to talk to other authors who have published before you and try to pick their brain about what has worked for them marketing-wise.
Lack of sleep.
If I could jump back in again for a second, I think, I found the most important thing is just being true to who you are And for me, it's like, hey, this is a book I wrote that I'm really excited about, and it's getting connected with other people who like that. And I'm really very fortunate to be involved with a bunch of folks on the internet who are really into Vegas. Some call them the Vegas Internet Mafia. And before I did Grandissima, I wanted to do a Kickstarter to defray the costs, and I set the goal of $2,500 and said, well, geez, I don't know if I'm going to make this. This is really tough. And within 4 hours of announcing it, thanks to Twitter and Facebook and some awesome friends, it was overfulfilled. So, it's really, and it wasn't just, hey, I got the right pitch or I said the right thing. It was, hey, I've spent the last 10 years being myself, and these people know what they're getting.
That's a good story.
Yeah, so that's what it's about. It's just about being yourself and finding people who like that.
And I have to say that, some of the nicest, most supportive, most gracious, and, just giving people are members of the writing community. I think that most of them remember how they came up and how people helped pull them up to the next rung on the ladder. And I think they go out of their way to do the same, to support each other.
And there's also people who, the great thing I like about Twitter and the internet is you meet interesting people. So last night, a man who grew up with Joyce Sarno, who was Jay Sarno's wife, got a signed copy of my book because a mutual friend of ours, a guy from Florida, who lives in Florida now, found me online and liked the book and got a copy from me signed for his friends. So it's just incredible how you can make those kinds of connections, where I never would have found, this guy never would have seen the book, living up in Michigan and not in Vegas. So it's really neat.
Yeah, it opens up a whole new world, I believe.
Yeah.
G, you are, I would say, a very successful writer/promoter. And again, I know that you've sold a lot of ebooks, which is something we haven't talked about yet. Would you address that for us?
As far as selling ebooks?
Selling ebooks, promoting ebooks, the difference maybe between selling hard copies versus digital?
To me, there's no difference to me between the ebook and the paper book. The person that I followed when I started, this guy named Dean Wesley Smith, and a fellow that wrote for Paramount. Wrote a lot of Star Trek books, stuff like that. I'm a big Trekkie, so But anyway, he was showing us back in the days when we used to query and go out to the traditional publishers a different way, this independent publishing. I'm an entrepreneur. It attracted me. He explained step by step how you should do it, and you can get published. You too can get published. Just back in 2010. And I followed the directions, and after 40 some odd years, I was published in 30 days. And I said, well, okay, that's cool. I wrote to Dean and said, hey, Dean, I followed your steps and, I'm out there. And he said, great, congratulations, write the next one. The point I'm making is that one of the biggest selling, the biggest selling point for any book is word of mouth. Word of mouth normally comes from the next book. So there's a difference between kind of being an author and being a writer. An author is a person that wrote a book. Okay, that's a past tense kind of statement. A writer is a person that writes books. Okay? If you're an author and you have a platform, a lot of nonfiction guys, they'll write a book. They're an author. The platform will sell it. I'm an orthodontist. They came up with a new way to put in braces. I wrote a book about it. I'm an author. So that, I'm going to lecture and I'm going to go out and do that. If you're a novelist, if you're storytelling, Deborah and I are, if you're writing novels, there is no platform. You're not an expert at BSing. There you go. So, really what sells the book is the next book. So, and Dean was very, very pointed about, this is a guy that wrote over 100 and published over 100 novels. And he going back 37 years. So the way the Pulp Fiction guys used to do it is you're turning out copy, you're turning out books. I mean, one after the other. And if you're good, people start talking about it, and if they talk about it, the book starts selling. So, social media aside, social media is a connectivity. If you go on my Facebook, you're going to learn a little bit more about me as a person. It's not a place to sell. All right, you're going to turn off. You're going to alienate a lot of your friends if all you're doing is hawking your book to the same 54 people you have or whatever it is. Although on my Facebook you learn what I eat too, which my wife hates because I love to take pictures of what I eat. I don't know. I think it's a Brooklyn thing.
Food porn.
But the bottom line is, on Twitter, you're sending out 140-word things, but really that's also about people that influence you. If you're, in other words, you're not talking about yourself per se always in social media, or you're going to wear people out. The place to, you put it out there, you publish a book, you let people know that you published it, you ask people to spread the word about it. It starts from your core, the people that read your books. And then after that, I really think that, from John Locke, a good friend of mine, who sold 2 million copies, sold 1 million copies in 5 months. I asked John what he did, and he said, listen, tie your blog into your book. Don't send out a blog a day, a blog a week, a blog, unless you're more interested in me. I'm not so interesting where I can write something interesting about myself every day of the week. So I write a book, I write a blog. The blog is attached to the book. If you like what and the blog isn't about the book, it's about whatever the storyline of the book. So I wrote a book now, Nothing So Glorious, and that was a term taken from Cicero, from the Roman orator. And it's about the unity of mankind. It's about people coming together, even enemies coming together. That's what the book's about. So I wrote a blog, The Unity of Mankind. It's been read over 15,000 times in the last couple of months. And all I do is, at the end of it, I ask for the sale. I say, listen, if this is the book I wrote, if you'd like to, get a free sample, and that's what sells books.
Yeah, and I think you're absolutely right, especially when you talk about using social media to promote your work. Nobody wants to read just another ad. That's the fastest way, and that's with any product, not just books, but the fastest way to have people heading for the exits, digitally speaking, is to be putting a bunch of ads up on social media. What you want to do is talk about interesting, useful stuff, right?
Well, what you're doing is you're building a relationship. You're building relationships with people, and that's what books do anyway. And so social media, we have a small window where we can build relationships with hopefully future readers who like the same things we like or are interested in what we have to say. And if we view our books and our blogs and our Facebook and Twitter and Pinterest and, oh God, whatever else, as building relationships, and it really is a lot more fun, and I think you bring a lot more personality to it, and you engage people, and then if they like you, hopefully they'll see they're interested in what you wrote, and they give it a shot. So
I think I add one more thing that David said that's really, really true. Be yourself. When you write something and you publish something, you become a public figure. Take it from an old rock and roll. We can't all be Ted Nugent or David Lee Roth. We're all each other. You're your own person. So the worst thing in the world to do, fiction, nonfiction, or anything, when you're dealing with the public, is to try to be somebody else, because you're going to come out insincere, and it's going to be very hard to maintain that. It's going to be hard to maintain not being the person that you are. So most writers, I'm sure there's a lot of writers here, I saw the hands raised, are introverts. They're not really very comfortable speaking. Then find your the place that you feel good about. Deborah's real good at speaking. Different people, I'm not really good at reading stuff. When I've done workshops and they ask me for my PowerPoint, that always makes me laugh, because I'll never want to even pay attention to PowerPoint, so that ain't going to happen. So just be yourself, and that's utterly what you're selling,
I agree with that, and I agree with you about building relationships. And personal branding, I think, is important. It's especially difficult, the audience may not know this, but fiction writers have, I believe, and the writers I talk to agree with me, a tougher time marketing their books, especially newer ones, than nonfiction. Because with nonfiction, the subject matter tends to carry the weight until you establish yourself. Somebody who might be interested in the Storm Drains, or somebody who might be interested in Sarno, may not care as much about the author initially. However, you're building personal brands and establishing those relationships. It's important for everybody, but I think especially on the fiction side, it's doubly difficult. I think the other thing that's difficult, we've talked about, besides promotion, writing is the easiest part. Talk a little about the editing, and then we'll throw it to the audience. I think this will be my last question, and the applaud. But the editing, for me, that back and forth of how many times you have to rewrite your stuff, is very challenging. And aren't you sick of it by the time it finally goes to press?
Absolutely. I mean, there's times when I'll just think the whole thing is terrible and get rid of it all. I really like to have somebody else edit it. and have that back and forth with them where I have another thinking person reading it, because they can see the connections that you might have missed, or hey, you go different from this to that. And as far as line editing goes, under no circumstances could I do it for my own work. I can edit someone else's work, great. My own work, terrible.
Writers should never edit their own.
Never,
Ever. Write that down. Matt, how about you?
Yeah, I was very fortunate with Huntington Press to work with a very good editor there that I know you know, Brian Musselman. And Deke was a bit old school. You would send him the printed out manuscript and he would take a pencil and actually go through it line by line and mark on the pages, which is amazing how much more that resonates than someone's just giving you verbal feedback, to see it on the white page. And he would say these are suggestions, they're not demands, and send the manuscript back, and you go page by page, look at all the marks and decide which changes you want to make and which ones you don't. So I was very fortunate, but I'm sure, I mean, that would be one of my fears of self-publishing, like, you know, who can I hire to be a really honest, good editor for this?
And you have to find a good one.
All the people that New York has laid off, they're out there doing freelance work. It's amazing.
And they're not as expensive as you would think.
They're not anywhere nearly as expensive as you would think.
Yeah.
Well, mine is the most expensive editor because she's sitting right here. It's my wife. Actually.
And she's probably the toughest editor,
Oh
too.
man, you know, she's from South Philly, and if you know anything about, you know, I married Rocky's sister. Right? Actually, when we started out, I gave it to. You give your book to the people that you trust most. When you're writing your first story, it's always, you know, I'm dropping my pants and bending over, so could you take a look at this, please? You give it to your wife until you can find an editor. And, you know, so I gave it out to other editors and this and that. And people even in traditional publishing understand that. It's a crapshoot. Even with the biggest presses, even with the biggest publishers in New York, 50% of the time they ruin the book, 50% of the time they make the book better. Editors are editors. You have to match an editor. Editor is a very intimate thing. There's different types of editors, content editor. You talk about line editor and copy editor. You have your proofreader. You know, there's different portions of it, what they're looking at. You know, some people looking just at, you know, if you're looking at just punctuation and grammar, that's one thing. If they're getting into your story and changing your story, that's going to be up to you individually of how much you want to give that over. I'm personally a control freak, so I'm very adamant about the stories I tell. So bottom line, as I was looking for the right editor, and I had my wife doing all this work for me, another good friend of mine, Barry Eisler, who's a big author, uses his, he's using his wife. He's always used his wife, and he says, what are you looking for somebody at? You basically have somebody. So the only thing you have to get used to if you're going to use somebody as intimate as your wife is the fact that they're going to be brutally honest with, I'll get really with 3 question marks to like 2 pages of and thinking, okay, so dinner's going to be interesting tonight.
And Deb, you've got the last word on this. You usually get the last word.
Well, I should. I'm the only female up here, right? I don't have a wife, so that doesn't really work for me. I've been looking for one, but it just hasn't worked out. Kidding, of course. But I have 2 very trusted what I call beta readers, and they're writers also. They're in Colorado, and they've read, God bless them, they've earned their way in heaven. They've read every word that I've ever written. And so I trust them very much. And so they edit my stuff, and by the time I get through with them, I am bloody. I am sure that this is the worst book I have ever written. I have been through it 50 million times. All the jokes fall flat. There's nothing funny about it. When I finally punch send to send it to my editor or my agent, I think, I'm dead. My career is over. And when I sent my first novel, or my editor got it, the only things he wanted me to change was he wanted me to take out 2 particular scenes in Want to Get Lucky. And they were the 2 scenes that I thought were by far the funniest scenes and the most critical to the character development and the story. And I fought him on it, which was rather brazen of me, and it turns out I was right. And the most reader feedback I got were for those 2 scenes. And so he quit editing. He's never edited another book that I had. And so I have no editor other than my beta readers. So I'm not sure that's a good thing or a bad thing.
But it is truly a collaborative process. And that's, I think, people don't realize. And I agree, on the indie side, you do have more control. You pick a good person who you have a meeting of the minds, and it really is the old two brains are better than one in that instance. But I have seen as well where people with traditional publishers have an editor that is assigned to them, and there's just no chemistry, and a bad editor, just like a bad agent, just like a bad anybody, is worse than no editor at all. So with that, I'm sorry, did you have another?
Well, I was just going to say that my editor, I actually fired him, but all he edited was military action adventure, and then he got my book, which is a funny, sexy, romantic mystery, light mystery set in Las Vegas. He had no idea what he was doing, and he wouldn't tell me he had no idea what he was doing. So finally, I got another editor. Now, 4 books later.
And I think that's awesome. You drove him into retirement. So. And with that, we have about 10 minutes left. Can we open this up to the audience if we have some questions? I saw a hand over there because you're standing.
Yeah, this has puzzled me for some time. I moved out here 2 years ago, and this group came out of the library at least once a month, and they discussed the work. Henry James, Peter Walker, Stephen Wong, Dash Hammett, Jim Thompson, Michael Schwann, Robert Rouff, Theodore Grimes, etc. So we had a discussion. 3 people come. We have 60 local authors. Not one who has been in any discussion. Except because today's writer likes to discuss. I'm so talented in this wonderful what if we talk about Henry James, Edith Wharton, trends in modern literature, PR lawyers. Nobody's interested.
I don't think it's that at all. I think that most writers, at least most good writers, should be really passionate about literature going all the way back. For me, the reason why you wouldn't see me there is because pretty much from 5 a.m. till 8 p.m., my time is already spoken for, and by 8 I'm ready to crash. So I don't get that as much as I'd like to be. I'd like to.
That's the problem. They're all dead.
Yeah, but they've got something to say, and I think anybody who likes to write should also like to read, and that's really important now.
Yeah, but I'm a commercial fiction writer, and so I write for today's commercial fiction reader. And most commercial fiction readers don't go back and read a whole lot of literature. It's not written in the same style, and I'm not here to argue whether that's good, bad, or indifferent. But I study my market, my readers. I read in my genre if there is one. I'm a commercial fiction junkie. I'm a commercial fiction hack. I am shallow. I actually had one of my first interviewers ask me, what do I read? And I'm sitting there going, well, let's see. I read Jeffrey Deaver and Lee Child and Nora Roberts. And he just sort of looked at me and he goes, wow, I've never had anybody admit that they're that shallow. And I was like, hey, it's what I do, and I'm it. You're looking at it. And so I spend a lot of time working on my craft. I don't have a lot of time to go back and read some of the authors of another day that I really enjoyed, and I have read them, but they're not what I'm doing right now. So
yeah, the writing life is all-consuming, and then on top of it, most of us have day jobs, so we're lucky we have time for our families. Yeah. I see a hand right there, gentleman in that.
Yeah, this would be for all the panelists, but Matt, you brought up some of your previous journalism work with City Life and the recent demise of City Life. What are your thoughts on how that impacts local journalism and writing and literature criticism, and a lot of those City Life writers migrating to the RJ? Do you think that's going to have any broader impacts on local literature criticism and awareness, things like that?
Yeah, for you, the people here who don't know, I worked at City Life newspaper for many years. It's an alternative weekly paper. It was independent for a while, then the RJ bought it, 7-8 years ago. And recently, it's been continually shrinking, getting smaller and smaller, and then recently it ceased publishing, which, is sad for me. It's where I got started. It was a great place for writers to get started. We're talking about how do you get published. I walked, straight into the editor's office with, part of a screenplay and a short story, and this was in the late 90s, gave me the opportunity to, if you have story ideas, pitch them to me, let me know. So I think one thing we're losing is like a venue for young, up-and-coming writers to get published. But of course, there are more of those venues popping up online, and I think that's where a lot of the writers at City Life are going to go, because print publications in general are just drying up here in Vegas, and more stuff is moving online.
We're sorry to see City Life go. It's at a very, very high standard of quality overall, and it really delved into areas that I don't think anybody else was playing in for a number of years. So it's unfortunate. Another question, right in front. I don't know if people heard that.
Stacey Willis's piece in Vegas 7?
Yeah, I was going to say, what?
There it goes, okay. Yeah, did you read Stacey Willis's piece in Vegas 7? Oh, very good. Yeah. There's some really great writers at 7. I write there, but there's tons of people whose stuff I really love, and Stacey's one of them. She's written some very compelling pieces on homelessness. The question was where they're going to be for more discussions like what Matt did in City Life.
Yeah, there's rumors of a similar publication popping up online only, but I don't know. It's just, look at what happened to City Life. I think a lot of people would be discouraged to try to start that kind of publication again in similar forms.
Okay, let's see. I saw that hand first, and then you after that.
With all the discussion about management, writing, G's comments on continuing to write, I'm curious, Deborah, do you write sort of things where you focus on a novel, finish it, and then go on to the next one?
I'm usually researching the next novel while I'm writing the current one, so it can get a little bit crazy. And right now I'm writing another series as well. And so in the morning I write Lucky, and in the afternoon I write a series that's set in Northern California in the wine country. And it's totally different book. And Lucky is told in the first person. It's funny, it's witty, it's quick. And the one in the afternoon is told in the third person. It's a little bit more lush, and so I'm feeling schizophrenic. I'm never quite sure which person I am by the end of the day. But when I first started writing, all I could do was focus on writing Want to Get Lucky. That was it. I was maxed out. And as you get more comfortable, I think, with your craft as a writer, and you understand the pacing and plotting, and it becomes more intrinsic, I think it's easier, at least it is for me, to work on multiple projects and keep up with where I am in the story and keep going. So it just becomes a job, and hopefully with time you get better at it. And I hope my fifth Lucky book is better than my first one.
I think we have time for about 3 more. I saw that gentleman over there. Okay. He's a smart man.
Yeah, sure. And yeah, I don't recommend anyone going down into the tunnels. Read the book instead, as they say, because generally it's safe, quiet down there. But you do. When it floods, it's dangerous. You have some mentally ill people down there, so it's a strange environment. But thank you.
The gentleman in the blue shirt right there.
Say anybody that hasn't read, they need to be on books already. And it should be widespread.
I actually used it as research for one of my characters in my book.
Sometimes I'm so into the character, the novel, the words, the scene that I'm creating, that when I finish the scene, I feel as if I was there. I feel so emotional. I feel like an actor sometimes feels like where am I now? I was really there. It's just like that emotion. One time I got tears and working on it. So, I don't know. Is that
Well, first of all, you're making a gross assumption that I am actually normal. But I will tell you my experience. No, I will. You know, that for me is the gold standard when that happens. I mean, I've had days where I sat down. I like to get up in the morning. I go for a run. I come back, have my coffee, sit down at the computer. And one day I looked up. You know, I did that, and I looked up, and I thought, God, I got a really bad headache. And you know, well, it was him. You know, and I mean, I just sat there. You know, and of course I had to go to the bathroom really bad too. But you know, and I was in the zone. And there are days that there's a transition period. Sometimes when I'm really working hard on the scene, and I'm at the Babylon, and stuff is happening, and I'm trying to figure it out. If somebody interrupts me, I mean, I'm like, I don't know what world I'm in. I can't possibly answer their question because I'm not in their universe at that moment. And so, yeah, it's great if that can happen. Some days it doesn't, and those are the days that I write for about an hour and then go do something else. But
one time I was at a factory and just coming out, they just finished the scene, and the guy was in a bad mood, bad day. So I carried that right backwards. I mean, I mouthed off to somebody and said, what's going on? I was just writing about that.
Don't write about a serial killer.
as a lawyer, I don't think that's a defense you can use.
I see one hand in the back. Way in the back. Yeah, you, waving.
Yeah.
Yeah.
One of the things
Stand up.
Stand up.
I am standing, I'm just short. One thing that was left out was, in terms of marketing, was blogging. I found that very effective. Submitting a query to a blogger. Some of them are crazy and demented. And some feel that if they don't review the book, thank you, we'll keep it for our library and don't return it. And I've been writing for 45 years, self-taught, and I like Dostoevsky. The second comment I want to say is, this gentleman, your name?
Dave.
Dave, I'm experiencing while I'm sitting here an early transference to you. And it's based upon your inner directness, which I have picked up, as opposed to outer directness, which I don't read anymore.
All right. Thanks.
I'm done.
One more question. Yes, sir.
Robert, I started writing my first book shortly thereafter. I've been unable to use my hands, so I pretty much quit reading, but went to audio books, so I started reading from other authors. Writing against that, these things that I had written in my book. And these weren't old concepts, either. These are new age things, but his words were exactly the same. So I started worrying that when I want to start writing this book again and finish it before I can, because I have some disease going on and there's a limited time. I have to restart this thing, and my worry is published says the exact same thing. And they're not getting information from scholars, Bibles, Googles in the past. That I thought that they have to stand up to, but the word is just
Is it fiction or nonfiction? Is it fiction or nonfiction?
You're the lawyer.
Nonfiction. Are you citing where you get? Are you taking the references from anywhere?
No, and I don't even want to read any of these.
Well, if you're saying that you're unintentionally coming up with the same premises that anybody comes up with, well, if there's, are they personal statements of your own life?
No, not my life.
Of your ideas? You've not, there's no plagiarism involved. Plagiarism is stealing somebody else's work. That's period. Done. I think a lot of authors, fiction and nonfiction, worry about being stolen from too much. In your case, you're worried about, I think you're worried about that you may unintentionally be writing something that somebody else came up with. Don't worry about it, because if you didn't steal from somebody, it's not plagiarism.
Some of these writers, like when I told my story, I said, like the wind blew right through me, the wording. It wasn't how
Doesn't matter. If
the wind blew right through every cell of my body. That's exactly what I said. The wind blew through every cell of my body when I was describing the spiritual experience.
Excuse me, I'm sorry. I'm just getting the wrap-up sign, so we do have to...
Well, I mean, there's a fine line, obviously, in what is plagiarism and what isn't, and it's obviously a legal definition that none of us have
you're the lawyer now.
are qualified to say. But if it's just a phrasing and you happen to use the same thing, we do it all the time. And I can tell you that there's phrases in my book that people use every day, and they're in other books. But just because that's not plagiarism. Now, if you take a whole page out of somebody's book, word for word, you know, you're going to have a problem there. But if it's just a happenstance, you know,
Thank you all so much for coming today. Let's thank you. All of our authors are on the panel are going to be on that table to the left in front. And just a reminder that we have a lot of other fine authors throughout the library. And this event goes on till 3 o'clock. I got the thumbs up sign. Thank you again.